Puerto Rico is still reeling far more than a year after the hurricane that knocked out power across wide areas of the island. Many of the schools and clinics and things like that still damaged, haven't been repaired. Many areas still have intermittent power. It's a disaster, and it's getting worse, actually. So last week, to save money, a nonprofit called Casa Ismael, which relies on its patients' food stamp money for funding, will ask patients to sit in diapers in which they had repeatedly urinated, sometimes for hours. The Casa Ismael Clinic is short on funds, in part because of cuts in food stamps that hit about 1.3 million residents of Puerto Rico this month. So we talked about this when it first happened, and now we're seeing the effects of it. Something like close to half of all of the people living in Puerto Rico benefit from that program, and that program last month was not renewed, which means that a lot of that funding is now gone, and you're starting to see that have ripple effects that are affecting other things. So people in this clinic, which is for people infected with HIV, are now going to be stuck sitting in diapers that were used hours ago because there just isn't money to replace it. Now, why is that? Well, the federal government originally provided additional food stamp aid to Puerto Rico after the hurricane, but Congress missed the deadline for reauthorization last March. They were focused on other things. At that point, early on, we were still dealing with the whole wall and national emergency declaration and all of that. At the time, Donald Trump, who we know has been no savior of Puerto Rico since the hurricane, wrote a letter calling the additional food stamp aid that was being debated, quote, excessive and unnecessary. Well, he's right. It is unnecessary unless you don't want to sit in a diaper for multiple hours in a clinic that has holes that have never been patched in the roof so that when it rains, it just comes into a medical facility. Then it would be necessary, I guess, but unnecessary if you don't mind that. And here's the thing. You might see that letter and think, oh, they're being fiscally conservative or something. Sure, in a callous, I would argue cruel or evil way. But it turns out that this is actually the first indication of an ongoing campaign behind the scenes of Donald Trump and his administration to not just not give Puerto Rico what it needs, but to attempt to starve them of the resources they need to maintain basic functionality in medicine, energy, transportation, and all of that. At an Oval Office meeting back in February, Trump asked top advisors for ways to limit federal support from going to Puerto Rico, believing it's taking money that should be going to the mainland, perhaps areas that look a little bit more like him and his family. A senior administration official with direct knowledge of the meeting described Trump's stance, quote, he doesn't want another single dollar going to the island. So we already know that in the immediate aftermath and the year after, not nearly enough resources were put into there. Now he thinks we were probably doing too much, and we have to figure out some way, without getting too much bad press, to make sure that Puerto Rico is left in the lurch and doesn't have the resources they need to maintain food supplies and things like that. It goes on, though. Trump said, quote, it's ridiculous how much money is going to Puerto Rico in food stamp aid. He has occasionally groused about how ungrateful political officials in Puerto Rico were for the administration's help. If you don't remember the help, it came in the form of him throwing paper towels at people. He thinks that he should have gotten more credit for that. And by the way, if you want to understand what leads a man to have that sort of stance, watch our video from last week about narcissistic personality disorder and how much people need to be constantly praised for the little that they do. It explains a lot of Trump in this area and others. So since then, since he said that, aides have described the president who regularly brings up the island to make sure it's not getting too much money. So in conversations about other topics, he will pivot to Puerto Rico asking if they have gotten any extra money because he doesn't want them to. He's bringing it up at random times. That is beyond sort of ambivalent about what happens at the island. That is like willful targeted cruelty against a population that can ill afford it. And so here's the interesting thing. Why are we in this position at all? Why is it that Congress can miss a deadline that results in clinics being devastated? Well, it's because it's not a state. So if the island would not need Congress to step in if it was a state. For states, the federal government is committed to funding those programs' needs, whatever the cost, and without needing to take a vote. It would have been automatic. They would have had it. But Puerto Rico instead funds its programs through a block grant from the federal government, which needs to be regularly renewed, and also gives food stamp benefits about 40% smaller than those of states, which means that you have to hope, oh, I hope the Senate's on our side this month, and even if they are, we're going to get less money. Even though we're Americans, we're going to be screwed over if they even remember that we exist. And in this case, they appear to have forgotten. Now, there is supposed to be a vote on renewing that food stamp funding, perhaps sometime in the next week. Donald Trump had been saying that he would not support it, that he would in fact veto the legislation if it happened. It appears that he has backed off that position. But he also feels really emboldened right now. So emboldened that he recently announced that they're not going to be supporting the ACA in the courts anymore. And so God only knows, coming out of this last week of news, what his position on Puerto Rico and their food stamp aid will actually be. But here at TYT, we will be watching.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.